They're increasingly showing that money doesn't make you happy is bullshit, by the way. Being fucking poor makes you very unhappy, right? And so, and the solution to that is knowing a little bit about finance. Learning how to drive your finances effectively and change your life is no harder than learning how to drive a car.
I actually want to talk about biotech.
Biotech's revolutionizing agriculture and dairy and cheese, and it's not just drugs, right? There's a cancer drug that basically has cured childhood leukemia. Fact.
Yeah, but it's ridiculously expensive.
It's $475,000 a dose. But they've gone from like X millions of dollars a dose for this thing to tens of thousands of dollars a dose. Stands to reason 10 years from now it will be like $2 or $3 grand a dose, and then children in Nigeria or India or Pakistan will be able to have a treatment for leukemia.
Yeah.
And the only way these companies can achieve that, just as with the TV becoming cheap or airplanes becoming cheap, is technology and crucially making a friggin' profit. Let's talk about just quickly the difference between investing and trading. They're completely different things. Trading's really tough. It's you're much more likely to lose money. It's far more time consuming.
I just say think in decades.
Yeah, 100%. And if the market goes down, carry on fucking buying, because that's what's going to make you wealthy. Yeah.
Totally. Welcome back to the Money Gains podcast. This week back on the show, we have one of our most loved guests, and that is best-selling personal finance author Andrew Craig, who is joining us to discuss all things the UK economy after the recent budget from Rachel Reeves. There has been, shall we say, some fire in the streets, and we are going to be putting the world to rights in this conversation. We also discussed the future of the stock market as well, and what is going to change the world in biotechnology with his new book, Our Future is Biotech. I absolutely love talking to Andrew, and this is a proper deep dive into the UK economy, but also the global economy as well. You guys are going to love it, so stay tuned and let's get started on the Money Gains podcast.
The Money Gains podcast. You know we derive.
So Andrew, welcome back to the Money Gains podcast, man. How are you?
Amazing to be back. Really good. And I can't believe it's literally 2 months since we did.
Your episode was a hit.
Oh,
like people were clamoring for more. I had multiple messages.
Well, mate, I'm very honoured, because every time I get invited back quite quickly after the first one, I always feel a bit self-conscious that, you shouldn't have me on again yet.
Like, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, yeah, and there's that as well. Sort of all my nonsense came out last time.
Well, the thing is, when I meet people like you, I know that I can talk to you for hours, and it's like, we get geeky over the same sort of stuff. We do get
very geeky. Whether it's any good or not is obviously the question, but fingers crossed.
Well, it's getting multiple views and lots of people liking it. So obviously it means one good thing. But I wanted to steer this conversation. I want to get straight into it. And obviously, if anybody wants to go back and listen to that episode, it's about 10 episodes back. Yeah. It's called This One Investment Will Change the World. And it was very much about your book as well, Our Future is Biotech, which we'll get onto, of course, today. But I think the way I'd love to steer this conversation is something that you've been talking about quite a lot recently, and that's kind of very much on the UK.
The bad news. So Our Future is Biotech. It's like, the world's going to be amazing. We're all going to be really wealthy and healthy and live for years. But the bad news is Britain is awful at the moment. Yeah.
And how do you feel things have been going at the moment?
Well, it's sorry, it sounds a slightly pretentious thing to say, but I was honoured to contribute my first guest article to The Telegraph last week.
Nice, congrats.
Which is, thank you. It was really cool, actually. It's gone super viral. It's had like 800 and something comments in 3 days. So
nice.
It's been a hit, and hopefully that means I'll get to do a few more articles. But it was a pretty punchy title to the article, which was something along the lines of Rachel Reeves' economic incompetence is mind-blowing, or something, which, to be fair to me, the Telegraph chose. And then they toned it down a bit. I can't remember what it is now. But on that point, I mean, I did a specific piece about, I find it absolutely bewildering that we have politicians, and to be clear, this isn't party political. I mean, it kind of is de facto because they're the Labour Party, but the Tories have been awful as well, like just dreadful. The lack of economic literacy and the damage that's wreaking in our country. But on that specifically, because obviously catalysed by the budget at the end of October, is like, how is it possible for anybody who's been a student of economics in different countries and nation states for the last, frankly, century, but let's just dwell on the last few decades, to think that what she's just done with national insurance contributions is going to do anything? The only growth that's going to engender will be in unemployment, insolvencies, and welfare costs. Higher unemployment, bigger welfare costs. And the proof's already in the pudding, in that, like last month was the second highest borrowing month ever in history since record began from the government. It was 17.2 billion quid or whatever. September was not far below that. So, already now the Labour Party is running, their borrowing levels are running way, way ahead of all the nonsense forecasts that they spew out, or whichever organisation you're talking about. And it's just like, you know, in the 60s, JFK reduced income tax, and tax receipts, like the amount of tax they got from people, went up massive.
Yep.
In the 80s, Ronald Reagan did the same thing. George Osborne, so Labour put the income tax rate up to 50% in the, whenever it was, early noughties, late 90s. Tax revenues fell. And then George Osborne put it back from 50% to 45%. Tax revenues went up. Corporation tax went from 28% to 19% over 10 years from sort of 2010 onwards. We made billions more tax. And this whole, like, it's really nuts to me that you can have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who doesn't understand the difference between tax rate and tax take. Because actually what I always come back to with all of this stuff, genuinely, is what is the best possible outcome for the biggest number of people, right? When you're making policy, what you want is as many people as possible live the best life possible. You know, you want your NHS, you want everything paid for. And if there's like decades of evidence that what you're doing is just completely wrong and it's going to engender a terrible outcome, like whatever your political persuasion, like don't do it. And that's actually, I finished the article with saying that the biggest irony about these, you know, what the government's doing at the moment is that the people who will be harmed most, without, you know, factually, like you might look at me and think I'm a Tory. I'm not at all. Like I'm giving up on all politicians in this country because they're all so incompetent. But you know, it's the least fortunate in society that bear the brunt of a cost of living crisis, right?
100%.
Because you know, if eggs and bread and milk and pasta and everything go through the roof and energy costs go through the roof, rich people, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal.
Exactly.
Frankly.
They're not going to stop shopping at Waitrose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And or they can downsize to Aldi. And, you know, if it's getting bad, exactly. You can do that in Fleet where we both live. But in all seriousness, it's, you know, that's how I signed off that article. It's like what I find so unbelievable is that the Labour Party was founded to represent working people and the least fortunate in our society. And it's nuts that you've got a situation where anybody who's vaguely economically literate will tell you that what they've just done is going to be ruinous to millions of people. It's going to, like 80% of pubs in Britain are now loss making.
Yeah, I know.
80% of it, restaurant, every single hotel group in the country is coming out up in arms saying we're screwed. You know, like the whole hospitality industry.
But we raised beer tax by beer tax by 1 pence.
But how they can't see that the net result of that is going to be hundreds of thousands more people out of work. High streets, you know, tumbleweed high streets up and down the country, right? Of basically like, because if you think about it, like in a really small high street, pubs are quite an important part of the community and the economy, right?
100%.
You know, you've got a betting shop. Nowadays, you've got
Jennings.
loads of charity shops and a betting shop and some hair barber shops or whatever. But the pub was the kind of epicenter of a lot of communities, particularly in rural communities.
Definitely.
So if a pub goes and your post office is gone and the bus route's not going, you know, this stuff, I mean, and yeah, I don't want to, God, you've got me straight onto my high horse, but I find it so depressing at the moment because it's like, it's just a no-brainer. All these decisions are being taken are so bad for Britain, and it's just made, you know, I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but, you know, the most, and by the way, this is the Tories, because the Tories have been cocking it up for, you know, the previous 14 years anyway. Yeah. But for me, the most important metric that we, you know, if you want to acknowledge there is a problem rather than this self-serving, am I allowed to swear on this one?
Please do.
Self-serving bullshit. That, no, it's great and Britain's really great and we're a tech superpower. It's just complete bullshit, right?
No, agreed.
And the evidence, the biggest evidentiary point is GDP per capita in Britain today is about 46,000 US dollars per capita, right? Sort of average incomes, which is roughly the same as what it was 30 years ago, right?
We've been slowly creeping down that leaderboard.
And actually, if you take the richest 1% out, all the people who are leaving at the moment, by the way, which we can come back to perhaps, which does matter. No matter if you want to hate the rich and vilify the rich, you know, if people who pay hundreds of billions of dollars and create all the jobs leave to go to Dubai or whatever, that's a serious problem for people who are left. But the point I wanted to make is that, you know, again, this is not, I'm not like pulling these figures out of the out of my proverbial, but like Ireland is twice as rich as us per capita now, depending on how you account for purchasing power parity. America's just way wealthy, you know, like $75,000-$80,000 per capita instead of our 45. Singapore, Australia, South Korea, like Poland is going to be richer than us soon. The Czech Republic is going to be richer than us soon. It's absolutely nuts, right? I know. And Winston Churchill and, you know, the great founders of empire must be turning their graves to see what we're doing. And the real frustration to me is that it's funny because I've never held myself out as somebody who speaks about politics. That's not my thing, right?
Maybe you speak about financial matters, which
and it does bleed over to politics because it's
100%.
like I guess my mission more than anything else, as I went back to, the reason I've been so mission driven about trying to improve the financial affairs, the financial literacy of as many people as possible, is because I see it as a silver bullet for a better society.
Absolutely.
We resonate with that. But if you had a few million more people in Britain understand what's in my book, all available on Amazon, etc., nonsense. But in all seriousness, if you have there's a stat from a survey about a year ago that said something like 14.6 million British adults are really challenged economically, which is all part and parcel of this, and it's a long road back, and and we're doing 180 degrees the opposite of what we should be doing if we want to sort that out.
Completely agree with you.
And that number's going to get worse. But the point I wanted to make is I think for a lot of those people, there's going to have to be a really, really big sea change over 10 plus years for them to be helped back into kind of being abundant and affluent and having a better life.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. So my mission then is focused on, let's say there's like 5 million fairly rich people in the country. 50 million British adults. Say 10% of them are actually, not doing too badly, and pretty well set up and fairly financially literate. And that corresponds roughly to the number of people who have stocks and shares ISA. Which I always go back to. It's actually a bit less than 5 million, but just call it that. My focus is the millions of people in the middle, because there are literally tens of millions of people in this country.
Yeah, how do we stop them slipping down?
Well, no, but if they just have basic financial literacy and took a set of relatively simple steps that we have obviously talked about and you're an expert on and you talk about and everything you do, stuff that's kind of obvious to you and it's obvious to me, and I've written books about it and stuff, but it's still not obvious to, it's still...
No, it's not at all.
Yeah, information that most people aren't conversant with. But if a few tens of millions more people understood this stuff and took it on board, the outcome for those people is life-changing.
Yeah.
And I can see that it takes years. It's just not, you can't just do something and the next year your life will be better. This is something that is a real slow burn, which is part of the problem, why it's hard for people. A lot of people can't take that on board. But bigger picture, and I came looking at around the wrong way around, but my broader point was going to be, if you have many millions of people who do that, British society is much better. Why is Singapore so rich? Because they've all got massive pension funds. Why is Australia so rich? Why is Norway so rich? Because they've done an incredibly good job with their financial affairs and their capital markets 100%. For since the 80s, and in Singapore's case, since the 60s. The people in Singapore are more than twice as wealthy as we are. And by the way, Singapore was as poor as a sub-Saharan African country at the end of the Second World War. So was South Korea, so was Taiwan. Today, they're much, much richer than us. Now, is that aliens from outer space just gifting them loads? No, it's policy.
Yeah.
It's good policy, right? And that's what makes me so angry, is we now have a political class, going back to being political again. And as I say, I'm not party political. The Tories were an unmitigated disaster. I think Blair and Brown were an unmitigated disaster. I think probably John Major, I now sound like I'm a Tory, but...
Well, he's possibly the last stable Prime Minister, right?
The last true state... I saw him present, actually, at an event in Wapping a few weeks ago, and he was unbelievably impressive. And just his
I still find him extremely impressive. Yeah,
and I think he got about... Because I don't know if you might... This sounds really patronising thing to say, but maybe you're too young for Spitting Image. Do you remember Spitting Image?
No,
there you go. I was right. So it was this crazy comedy show with sort of rubber puppets. That was a huge hit in like the 80s, and they basically had they really had it in for John Major, and they made him into this. He was all painted grey, and he's like this.
All right.
And so I think that kind of slightly torpedoed his career. It's a bit like. Do you ever watch Bo Selector?
Oh yeah.
So
to what they done to Craig David.
Craig David. Craig David was not loving.
Not happy, was he?
Not loving Bo Selector. Nor Chris Martin. It's a running around with clocks going on. But God, wow, it's slightly going off piece there. But
no, but I think what you're trying to say is that essentially they had a chance to in this budget, I think, to rectify it, right? And that what they didn't do is they went completely. I think for me it was like a PR lauded win.
Yeah,
there was
there was a big... So everybody I know in the city, like senior city professionals, are basically expecting what they thought was happening, which companies do a lot. So like when companies announce their results, they kind of have all the financial analysts that write about them sort of bring their numbers down, and so they can do a positive surprise, and then the share price reacts positively. And it's this idea that you should always kind of under-promise and over-deliver, and then you get a disproportionately positive result from doing that, right? Because it's all kind of, momentum and feel good and everything. And that sort of those animal spirits play into how the economy can function at the level of the economy rather than, say, a company. And so the sense was that, you know, there was all this nervousness about capital gains and inheritance tax and blah, blah, and what was she going to do? And it's labor and it's going to be a disaster. It's going to destroy the economy.
Yeah. Some of the WhatsApp chats were incredible.
100%. But everybody kind of expected, now what's actually going to happen is she's going to stand up and it's going to be really quite sensible. And everyone's go, okay, awesome. And there'll be a big relief rally. You know, the pound will go up, gilts will be steady, and like billions of pounds will flow into UK equities, and off we go, and everything's better again. And it wasn't that. It was a complete catastrophe. And it's just mind-blowing.
Have you ever felt like investing is only for the experts? Well, with Trading 212, that couldn't be further from the truth. They've made it their mission to democratize investing. So now anyone can start building their financial future, regardless of experience or their budget. Their Stocks and Shares ISA is packed with benefits. No platform fees, industry low FX fees, and access to thousands of investment options from ETFs and funds to individual stocks. Plus, the app is so user-friendly, you can start investing with just a few taps. But what really sets Trading 212 apart is how they're FCA regulated and offer clients' funds FSCS protection. So while your investments can go up or down, you know that they're held in a safe, secure environment. And right now, there's never been a better time to join. Trading 212 is giving you a free fractional share worth up to £100 when you open an account and deposit just £1. To claim your free share, click the link in the show notes below or enter the promo code MGP when you sign up. That's MGP when you sign up. As always, remember your capital is at risk when investing. ISA rules, T's and C's, and other fees may apply. If you've ever wanted to start investing but didn't know where to begin, Trading 212 is here to make it super simple. Start your investing journey today and see where it can take you. And now back to the episode.
Which is why I had to write such a cheeky article for the Telegraph last week.
What astounded me most about it was that I saw, so the average GP practice was an extra £50,000 a year in cost.
Yeah.
Which is direct.
Well, so I literally wrote in that article, and I forget the name of the guy, he's the chairman of the British Medical Association, because I said something like, when Rachel Reeves stood up in Parliament, it seemed to me, because she was challenged by, I guess, the Tories, it must have been, they said, do you realise that these national insurance rises are going to like be incredibly problematic and destructive for GPs, dentists, charities, hospices, care homes? Did you intend that, Chancellor? And she literally looked like she hadn't figured that out. I'm not kidding. If you watch it, if you manage to see that on YouTube or whatever,
I watched the whole thing.
Right. She literally was like doing a really good impression of a fish, you know. And the point I made is that the BMI chairman basically said that it was clear to them that the government had not understood the impact on GPs.
Totally.
And that's just like,
well, it doesn't surprise me if you think about the actual cabinet itself. There is not one person who has ever run a business.
Yeah, I know.
So you got an entire cabinet that is then not understanding how UK business works, making decisions for CEOs who know how to run businesses.
And not listening to them. Because that was the other thing. So I wrote a piece, we might have talked about this last time. I wrote a piece last year at the request of a FTSE management team, basically, which was on challenges to the London Stock Exchange, why it's been so challenged, why we've lost half of our companies, and, you know, £1.5 trillion of, I mean, like, I think, I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but, you know, the London Stock Exchange has been a slow motion car crash since like 2007, basically, for a generation. And so I had the chairman and the CEO of a big UK PLC just say, look, we know you're writing this book, we know you kind of don't, you know, you don't have a day job, we've got a day job, can you do this work for us? And so I pulled it all together, and they had lunch with Ian Duncan Smith, and then that piece of work, and it wasn't just me, it was like they'd canvassed opinions from lots of people and pulled all this stuff together, but it went into the Tory cabinet. And I definitely got a sense that, you know, in my own little way, I'd managed to get some kind of information into them. And as I say, they canvassed lots of different views. And what the reason I mentioned it is because when it started looking like Labour were very likely to win, it also became clear that, it seemed that Reeves and Starmer were basically, there was a lot of lip service, and they were engaging with the city, and they were listening to people like these people I wrote that piece for. And a lot of folks I know in the city and in, you know, investment management and stuff were quite excited and thinking, wow, you know, she's listening, she's hearing what the problems are, she's making quite a lot of sensible noises, And, you know, the whole, I know it's one of the questions you wanted to come on to, the whole sort of £80 billion super fund, big pensions. Maybe we speak about that.
Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, so it was those kind of, at least it was acknowledging there's a problem. Because one of the really tragic things about all of this is like, whether it's, well, I don't want to sort of name names, but, you know, whether it's the political class or the regulatory class or certain bodies that are tasked with making sure the British economy is in good shape. And I guess it's natural. It's like, you know, you criticize anyone in any walk of life saying that's a bit shit. You know, they're going to defend themselves, right? But it's really, really noticeable just how many of these bodies just say, no, there's nothing to see here. There's no problem. You know, like AIM, the alternative investment market, the smallest bit of the London Stock Exchange, is a car crash. It's hemorrhaging companies. Nobody can raise any money. It's a complete car crash, and it's just embarrassing. And all the people tasked with talking about AIM are constantly, so it's one of the world's leading growth equity markets. It's like, what numbers are you looking at, and how disingenuous can you be? And so, but then Rachel Reeves came along, and it was kind of like, at least they're acknowledging there's this problem. And so these sorts of things like that mega, you know, pension fund,
£80 billion mega pension
but
fund
I think
unlock.
that she's got completely the wrong end of the stick, because again, so basically that whole, a big focus of the announcement, the Mansion House speech the other week, was that costs in pension funds are too high. And so if we bash all these assets together and consolidate it in the hands of, you know, bigger funds with more billions of pounds, that will bring costs down, that will be better for your pension. That is like abject stupidity, because, you know, whether you bring costs, I mean, because costs in these funds are already pretty low. She's listening to the big boys who benefit most from this, right? Because these guys,
She's been swayed.
They go and see Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank. They don't go and see the dozens of smaller businesses that are actually where the lifeblood of the British economy is, right? And so my thinking on this is, it's good that they're thinking about how to remedy this tragic, you know, catastrophe that is the London Stock Exchange. Because just to take a step back, this stuff matters for the real economy and for real people. That's why I always find, like, people look at me, oh, you're a city guy and stuff. It's like, yeah, you got to understand that, you know, 50% of employment and 50% or whatever, it's 60% of employment, 50% of revenues in the economy come from smaller companies. And so, and by the way, future larger companies come from smaller companies.
Is it that big?
Yeah. I mean, and without, so I always go back to this example, I feel a bit self-conscious, but so I was in the team that floated EasyJet. 20 years ago, whenever that was, and, you know, raised whatever it was, I can't remember, like $200 million or whatever, to buy a load of 737s for Stelios.
Nice.
And, you know, now, fast forward how many years, and it's been a volatile ride, because airline companies are tricky ones, but it's a much bigger company serving, you know, and it's kind of an unsung British success story in many ways, right? The fact that millions more people can go to hundreds more cities. And you think about, again, sorry, I'm being patronizing because I'm such an old bastard, but, you know, I remember trying to fly to like second tier places in Europe in like the late 90s. It was much more difficult and more expensive.
Flights everywhere. And
so Ryanair, EasyJet, Wizz Air, whatever, that's a cool kind of function of the real economy. But now I've lost my thread, because I wanted to basically say that, you know, smaller company equities are super important for the economy. And we've got a problem. But yeah, this is it, to come back to Rachel Reeves' solution. By concentrating much more power and money in the hands of the really big ones, really have to invest in really big companies, just kind of logistically. So all you're doing there is you're engendering an even more winner takes all outcome, in my considered opinion. And the cost benefit, the marginal cost benefit of bigger funds having slightly lower costs, and that, however that affects your, put it this way, if your pension returns are 2% a year for 40 years, and you pay 0.4%, 0.2% instead of 0.4% of your pension, the much bigger issue is that you've made 2% for 40 years, right? What she should be focusing on is, how do we make 9, 10 or 11 or 12%?
Yes.
Because UK small caps did 15.5% from 1955 to 2021, which we've completely, correct. The smallest, 15? More than 15%, 4 times property performance, right?
Wow.
That's from Dimpson and Marsh. So that's a well-known study, Professors Dimpson and Marsh at the London Business School, and they've updated that every year. That all just fell over in the last 3 or 4 years because of all this problem. But basically, why? Because think about games. I just said EasyJet, right? Think about Games Workshop. Like spotty little geeky boys like I used to be when I was 12, you know, painting little goblins.
I used to have a little goblins.
A bit of Dungeons and Dragons action.
Absolutely.
But you know, doing that, there were relatively few of those sorts of characters in 1985 or whenever that business was founded. It's now like a I haven't checked recently, but it certainly was high as £3.5 billion company, right? And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of companies like that. And my point is, what we need to be doing is supporting British small caps, because they're dying. Because I mean, this sounds a bit serious, but I think I'm right in saying that Apple was less than $5 billion market cap in the late 90s, and it's now what, 3 and a bit trillion or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I've sort of made this thrown away comment before, but like, you know, it wasn't that long ago that Apple was a sort of slightly weird computer company that you'd get your gran one of those pink computers. You know,
I'm listening to the Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson.
Oh, amazing!
It's amazing, but like hearing the actual birth of it wasn't really. They weren't actually a real proper company.
Well, they went wrong loads of times as
100%.
well. But my point is, you know, we can't. We've demonstrably failed to get even close to building a British
Apple,
or even something a 30th of the size. So Arm Holdings.
I was just about to say Arm is probably the closest.
It's the biggest, most successful company in a generation, and it's listed in New York. And all the economic value and loads of the employment and loads of the institutional ownership goes there.
Yeah.
And this is why I find it so absolutely maddening that our political class is like, nothing to see here, everything's great. London Stock Exchange no, it's not. It's a complete disaster, and that is
because they can get better valuations, right? They can get better valuations,
and this is the point. So, it's chicken and egg, because I get a lot of kickback on this. It's like, well, don't tell me that I should invest in British companies as a kind of nationalistic thing, because if I get shit returns, why would I do that? I should be owning Apple, Microsoft, or whatever, the Magnificent Seven. But it's chicken and egg. And it's because we've allowed all these terrible decisions we've made over 30 years, this slow motion car crash from Brown and Blair onwards, is the reason that British shares are now, they trade at between 40 to 60% discount to, 60% discount to American shares and 40 to 60% to different markets like Australia or Singapore or whatever.
Yeah, it's wild.
But that means this, what most, like, you know, the normal person who's not a student of capital markets doesn't understand what that actually means. What that means is, so firstly, if you're Shell and you want to acquire an oil company in Malaysia, or, you know, that's actually not a great example because there's been a lot of consolidation already. But if you're a British company and you want to buy another company, you're half as powerful as your American competitor or your Singaporean competitor. So it's not like a fair competition anymore. You're massively disadvantaged. But 100%. The really insidious thing, which I think could play out in the next few years and could be really even worse for Britain, and we could go even further south, is that so if you are Shell. So right now, Shell, HSBC, you know, AstraZeneca, Glaxo, all our biggest, best companies, all of the big institutional shareholders of those businesses, particularly if they're overseas, if they're in Asia or the States, will be saying to the management team in meetings, if you were on the US stock exchange, you'd be valued, you know, let's say that your share price is £2 right now. If you move to the US stock exchange, you'd be valued at £3 and you'd be tens of billions of dollars more valuable business. You'd be able to raise far more money from the debt markets. You'd be able to acquire more companies. You'd be able to have a much more successful trajectory. Why the hell are you still on the London Stock Exchange? And it's getting increasingly hard for these companies to defend being on the London Stock Exchange. So if we lose, we've already lost BHP Billiton, you know, Flutter. We've already lost all these leviathans of British industry and Arm, but arguably the most painful one. There's half a chance we're going to hemorrhage another half dozen really, really big British companies. They'll be gone. And it's like, meanwhile, Rachel Reeves is increasing national insurance. It's like,
I know. Yeah, you're totally right. Or they get bought, right? And that's another thing.
That's a threat. Well, as
US
I think I saw you
in.
comment on this. I think it's like 22 FTSE 250 companies that are currently in the process of being looked at, right?
By US equity.
Yeah. Private equity or and it's like,
I think I saw you say that there was 2 last week.
Yeah, there were two new ones announced that they were in the process. But this, you know, for the whole of my adult life, having been a student of economics and involved in capital markets, my view is that it should be a free market. Like if a bigger, better funded company wants to come over the hill and buy a British company, like Cadbury's was bought, or, you know, whoever it might. Aston Martin,
I don't think that's is the pure basis of the fact that they are so cheap.
Well, yeah, but what I was going to say is, like, theoretically, you should like. Capital markets, there shouldn't be government intervention saying you can't buy that because it's British and we're going to keep in Britain.
I agree.
That's the road to ruin. But set against that, it's the government and the regulatory decisions in the last 30 years that have got to the point where our stock market is on its knees. So all these vultures can come from it. Because, like, if we had a thriving stock market with capital depth, and let's just unpack that a bit more, because So in 30 years ago, 50% of UK pension assets were in UK companies. Today, it's less than 4%. And so, and that's like, if it's like one picture to, that's the money shot. That's the main reason. And that is entirely because of regulation and bad political decisions, or largely because of. And so just to elaborate on that a bit more, to just show how hair-raising this is. So Australia, the Australian stock market is 1.5% of the global stock market by value, right? It's quite a lot of good companies in Australia. So, and it's a small country, but that's actually quite impressive, right?
Yeah.
So Australia is 1.5% of global equities by value. 40% of Australian pension assets are in Australian companies.
Wow.
So we're 4%, and 2.7% of our pension assets are in British companies, right? And obviously these numbers move around a lot because the market moves around a lot. These are numbers from a few weeks or months ago. In America, it's something like America's 45% of global equities, and it's like 60% of American pension assets are in American equities, right? We're the only country in the modern developed world that is massively underweight our own domestic equity market, which is why all our companies are on their knees or going abroad or going bust. Our economy's shot to pieces. People are really struggling. It's also something to do, it's a fair bit to do with the cost of living crisis, because if you have to invent money out of thin air, our interest rate bill now is 90 billion quid a year.
I know. It's nuts.
It's like twice what we spend on defence and nearly as much as what we spend on education.
Yeah.
How have we allowed that to happen? This is a country, we've got more Nobel Prize winners. We are a country of amazing science.
And then they bang on about the black hole, and I'm just like, they're
tinkering
really
around the edges. And actually it's worse, because I think, to where we started, the recent budget is 180 degrees the opposite of what we want to do if you want British people to have a better life and be wealthier, right?
Yeah.
And then this plan to try and sort of repair the state of, it's, as I say, it's good that they're recognising there's a problem. The choices they're making, though, are like, they're not listening to, because I think the engine room of our economy should be smaller companies, like based on a century's worth of evidence.
Yeah.
And not just giving more money to the biggest companies in London and them consolidating even more assets and getting paid even more and investing in only the biggest companies.
To bring it back to that, like, friend of ours, like, we were chatting, his business, 110 people in the UK, his bill next year is close to £200,000. Now, they were potentially...
You mean the increase as a result of national insurance? Yeah.
And like, that was like a best case estimate.
Yeah.
He said he's got two choices. Either prices get pushed on to the consumer, or he has to cut probably 10% of stuff.
Yeah. Or move abroad, or hire people in wherever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All things he doesn't want to do, because he prides himself on being a British company that hires British people.
Yeah.
And like, he's very patriotic, and but he's like, my hands are literally tied
100%.
Because my board will turn around to me and go, we don't care. You've got £200,000 to find. You're supposed to be up.
That's the thing that, again, to your point about members of the cabinet never having been involved with business, they don't understand terms like fiduciary duty. Like, your fiduciary duty as a director of a business.
To increase the business.
Yeah, part of the reason directors get paid a lot, and people are directors, they work like 2 days a month and get paid 80 grand a year, only in a very big company, by the way. But like, a director at a small company might get paid 20 or 30 grand a year for doing like a couple of days work a month. A lot of people find it really hard to get their heads around that. The reason for that is they have a massive legal liability. Like, if they're involved in a chemicals company and it poisons people, they can go to prison, and so it's kind of like that's why it's actually called compensation, right? Because you have to take a lot of risk and you have to be on top of your game. And you're right. So your friend has a fiduciary duty to his shareholders and his board and his other stakeholders to do the best he can do. The government's just made that much harder. So what's he supposed to do? And just to unpack another point that you raised there from that example, what does that mean for inflation? It's like, we're going to go for growth and try and reduce inflation. It's like, no, what you've just done is going to result in tons of inflation.
Sainsbury's was £230 million.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and where does that cost go? That goes on the eggs. It goes on the bread. They're not going to get the team smaller, because they're already understaffed in a lot of these locations as it is.
Yeah. So what's going to happen? So
on product,
and they're also going to screw down margins on people like farmers and food producers.
Exactly. And then the hospitality thing is just mental.
Well, it's so. I saw a piece the other day about basically the demise of the nightlife industry in the UK.
And it's been declining for
30 years. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
when we had it, our margin was at one of our locations was 3.5%.
Exactly. Well, and that's just been toasted by this.
Completely
exactly.
gone. Like, and I know, having spoken to my old friends who we used to run the business with, like they had to get rid of tons of staff. They've had to cut right back on all of the.
Yeah, it's like how many hundreds, if not thousands, of people are us having these conversations.
It's the 0 hour contract thing, and like, oh yeah, it's just nuts. And exactly, like, and how have they not seen that?
But then that
seems so obvious.
So that Telegraph article, you know, I had 800 or whatever when I left the house today. It was 803 comments, and like loads of them are just like massively agreeing because they're obviously like full on Tory graft, you know, red meat for the people who hate Labour. But you know, a lot of them were making the point that this is actually like people like Starmer and Reeves. That they have a dogmatic ideological desire to basically just they don't care if everyone's worse off if there's less inequality. So if the rich get poorer but the poor get poorer too, that's a good outcome for them. And there was a great article a few years ago. So be careful what you wish for when it comes to inequality and equality, because I'm a big believer in equality of opportunity. So everybody should get the same chances. Doesn't matter where you're from, what your background, your ethnicity. Everybody should get the equality of opportunity as best we can. Which is why, by the way, you know, university should be free. That's something we should spend money on, right? Because everybody then gets into university. What you shouldn't aspire, certainly not through a political regime, is equality of outcome. Because, i.e. that you force everyone to have the same outcome. Because that's not natural. It's not natural in sports. It's not natural in music. It's not natural in anything,
sort
right?
Of semi-communist approach.
Yeah,
really.
it is. And so the point, the sort of, if you follow that on to like the evidence of the last 2 centuries, looking at dozens of countries, because you can measure, like using regression mathematics, you can measure like countries that have more equality in terms of, you know, the Gini coefficient, like what the income disparity is. And consistently, countries that are closer to equality have much, much worse lives.
Yeah.
Like they're much like, I mean, the really extreme examples are North Korea compared to Switzerland, or, you know, at the two extremes. But not only that, they have higher rates of crime, homicide, like unhappiness, depression. And it's just like, because actually, so America's got its own problems with unhappiness and crime and depression and all that stuff. But one of the things that,
but they have the American dream.
But it's the American dream because actually people want to be aspirational.
100%.
Most people want to believe that they can improve their life and get better and be wealthier a few years from now. They don't
I
want
do this.
To just think,
this changes my life. And
agency.
So,
most people want to have
100%.
agency of their life because agency makes you feel empowered. And the record of psychology is that is good for your mental health. You know, and if we all just sink into a morass of, well, nothing I do matters anyway because the government's just tax it all and blow my company up and give it to, you know, whoever.
Well, that's a lot of the conversations we've been having recently.
Well, the other, by the way, just because I love getting this one in there, because the other pushback you often get from people is, well, because if you basically look at that distribution, say Switzerland's good, Singapore's good, the States is imperfect, but it's good, you know, which are the good countries? These ones, they have lower tax rates, they're blah, 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 and everybody's wealthier and better off, right? And then really crap countries are, you know, I mean, North Korea is the obvious, you know, blah, blah. And then you get back is, what about Scandinavia? Because they have really high tax rates and like basically very socialistic left-wing countries.
But the infrastructure is incredible.
Well, exactly. There are a couple of points to make about that. And it's like the most, there are actually 3 points. The most fallacious thing, and that is such a bad example which fails to understand a century of evidence and how economics works. So there are a couple of things. Firstly, their per capita resource endowment is massive. So Norway basically gets
what does that mean?
So if you divide the number of millions of people in Norway or Sweden or Finland into the natural resources they have, zinc, copper, uranium, timber, fresh water, fish, like everything, right? In Norway, they basically have free electricity for everyone. But I mean, it's not free, but the production of it is, because it's all hydroelectric power. So when Norway got the North Sea, there's like 8 million of them. They've got loads of electricity. They've got timber coming out their ears. They've got all these metal deposits and everything else. They took that oil and they built a multi-trillion-dollar sovereign wealth fund, which is why everybody in Norway is extremely wealthy. So point one is that, like lots of other countries, Singapore has no per capita resource endowment. Neither does Taiwan. They basically have to import everything. Neither does Japan, right? So you have to like disaggregate their natural benefit, their natural advantages versus stuff that they achieved themselves. Like Japan's a miracle, right? Because they got no oil, they got nothing, they got fish.
Yeah.
And they've still achieved this economic miracle by being technologically very advanced and, you know, working really hard and whatever else in the since the Second World War. The other point is Sweden was neutral in the Second World War. So actually, it had many. If you have several years where the whole of the rest of Europe is rubble, and London and Birmingham and Manchester, and you have no capital destruction, you continue with capital formation. All your money's in a Swiss bank. You know, basically, Sweden had a nearly 7 or 8 year advantage and not having to spend anything like as much on, you know, armaments. And so Sweden came out of the end of the Second World War with like a 20+ year advantage over everyone else, right? That was involved in the war.
Which is pretty hard to mess up if you're trying to catch up, right?
And so they've got this huge per capita resource of them. They have this massive advantage in the Second World War. And then the final bit is what's called the counterfactual, which is that if you actually think about how much wealthier would Scandinavia have been if it had had similar policies to Singapore and Switzerland from the 1950s until now? Pretty likely to be way, way, way. And if I used to work for a Swedish investment bank, and most of my Scandi friends from each of the 4 countries will agree with that and say, yeah, we've been massively held back, and we could have done much better, but we started off way, way wealthier than everyone else. Yeah, and so that's the, you know, I hate to get on my high horse about that, but you know, as a student of these things, I think there's so much nonsense talks. I think people don't understand these nuanced things around, because it's really important, because then we make really bad policy decisions like Rachel Reeves has just made, which ruins people's lives.
I'm on track to have over £5.5 million in retirement. And I'm not saying this to brag, guys. I'm saying this because I am an everyday person just like you. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that it's actually possible for you to build life-changing wealth too, no matter where you're at on your journey, your age, your knowledge, or even your current financial situation. So Sammy, how do I sort that out? Well, I've created something super cool, which literally takes 1 minute of your time. I've left a link in the show notes to a free money personality quiz, which will provide you guys with a free tailored content plan based exactly where you're at on your financial journey. Once you filled it out, you're sent the steps to start getting you results from day one. And then once you're ready, you can then move up to the next step very easily too. It's not judgy in any way. It's totally free to do, and it's actually really good fun too. Simply head down to the show notes and click the link there where it says to do the quiz and get your free money action plan right now. Now back to the show.
Yeah. It makes us all poorer. So anyway, that's all. So I'm ranting away.
It's, do you know what? It's so frustrating, but it gets to the point where it's like, well, like it's constant. It seems to be constant.
What can you do?
Like, yeah. But it does seem like every 2 years we just set ourselves up for, like, we're basically just constantly just smashing ourselves with a hammer in the foot.
Well, exactly.
Like, and we've got an opportunity to not, and we just do it anyway. And it just feels like that. Liz, Brexit, all of these things. It's just like, it's like a comical car crash of just events that just keep happening.
And it sort of feels like, I think a big part of how do you solve that, right? Because I think one of the biggest problems in Britain is that we have a really unprofessional political class.
I'll completely agree.
Yeah. To your point about the cabinet don't have any.
Well, yeah, but even like how power is stored in London.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly,
very much
not devolved, and exactly. In Switzerland's like unbelievably wealthy per capita, and it's cantonal. You know, it's regional. Everybody cares about what their local city's doing because they're involved and their tax revenues are directly attributable. And
if you took London out of like the wealth conversation, actually the UK is an extremely poor country.
Yeah, 100%, massively, really depressingly so, and certainly poorer than places like Poland and the Czech Republic.
Totally.
And look at the different experience of the last 30 years. But you know, because the other thing I go back to, and this is where people really don't like this idea. But so we've got 650 MPs and like, I can't remember, 1,100 lords or something.
It's wild.
So my first job, I was an intern on the Hill in Washington, DC.
Okay,
in the summer of 97, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's nice.
It was good fun. Pentagon clearance and all that sort of nonsense. But very minor. I could get in the door. It wasn't like looking at old CIO files about JFK or whatever. Exactly. But the reason I mention that is because I always reflect on the fact that I think the number of congressmen is either 435 or 465. So basically the US equivalent of the Houses of Parliament, the MPs is the Congress, and then the equivalent of the House of Lords is the Senate, and there's 100 senators. So the US population, 350 million or whatever it is now, has got 465 or 430, I think it's 465 congressmen and 100 senators.
Yeah.
And we've got 650 MPs and over 1,000 lords.
Yeah, and landmass, which is not even 10, 20.
And the number of MPs is calibrated for an era where we rode on horseback and didn't have things like phones and the internet and email, right?
We need to get a note over to the next.
Correct. So you had constituencies that were basically small enough for politicians to stand up and be able to talk to in a big town hall and wherever, right? And it's just nonsensical that we still have that system because, and this is my belief, and this is where it does get a bit controversial, right? Is that we should have 1/6 the number of MPs. We should have 100 sort of British senators, right, or whatever, with much bigger constituencies, and pay them all 2 or 3 million quid a year.
Okay.
Because then you would get really, really smart, good people,
right? Exactly.
Going into politics.
It's the people as well.
And people hate that. It's like, oh, you know, they were like relative. I mean, it's ridiculous. So the classic example. I think did we talk about this before? But there was an advert for the head of cybersecurity for the UK.
Yeah. And
cybersecurity is like, it's really scary. So as a little aside, sadly, I lost my mother to breast cancer a few years ago, right? And I only mentioned that, it was 2017, but I only mentioned that because there was a Russian hack of the NHS. You might remember, it was in the news.
Yeah.
Of like the NHS, various different systems, and it all went down for whatever. And her scans were caught in that. So they didn't catch her brain mets for several weeks because of that. And that was part of what, she probably lost a year or two of life because of that, thanks to some Russian hackers, right? That is just a little vignette, obviously one that's personal to me, of just how intrusive these people can be. And
100%.
I was listening to the radio only today about how, there's one of the biggest risks perceived by the Pentagon right now, and, MI6 and whatever it is, cyber warfare. We've just put an advert out for UK head of cybersecurity on 65 grand a year.
Yeah. It blows my mind.
The head of cybersecurity at Apple's probably on tens of millions.
Yeah.
And it matters because if you're competing with like Russians who aren't making millions and Putin's giving them, bunging them, we lose. And
they've got whole like departments, hundreds of thousands of people employed in them.
100%. And it's, it all sounds a bit right wing and sort of red in tooth and claw and stuff. But,
but it's a justification of like how wrong we've perceived to be the right thing,
and where value is, but because in all this stuff, somebody made the point that a sort of accessible analogy is a top Premiership footballer gets paid X, and a sort of have a go hero on a Saturday afternoon doesn't, right? And the difference is, I don't know much about football, but Lionel Messi or Ronaldo, they are that much better to justify that money to a certain extent, right? And it's true in every walk of life. Or like, you get one Beethoven, you get 9 magnificent symphonies. Yeah. You can get 100 average music graduates and you'll get none. It is that bifurcated. And so I think one of our biggest problems writ large with what's going on with, the recent budget and to your point about Britain being a slow motion car crash is if you have really mediocre people in Westminster who don't have 30 years of experience I don't think any MP should be, or cabinet minister should be empowered to run something unless they've had at least 20, preferably 30 years of experience. And the other problem with our system is they move around.
Yeah.
You get these
imbeciles
who have they get 2 years in health and 2 years and it's like
well,
they have no opportunity to build networks or deep expertise and stuff. But God, this is a really political one. Can we talk about how good the world's going to be anyway?
I'm
still going to be good. No,
I'm going to get on to
you lead the charge. Yeah.
There's a fix to this.
Hopefully.
Of course. But I agree. Like there's a lot to sort out, and it just seems like there's too much to sort out.
Yeah.
And it was just frustrating, I think, just to round off that budget conversation.
Well, I mean, philosophically, I think I said this the other day, like, which I try to do, is think of a Buddhist monk with an orange robe and a begging bowl, right? Economically, they have nothing. Like, literally, that's the whole culture. Like in Buddhist, in villages that are Buddhist in Tibet or wherever, and the community supports them and gives them rice and food, and they have nothing. They're not supposed to have any possessions. And if you asked 100 people, are Buddhist monks happy, fulfilled, content? The answer probably yes. There's probably a few quite fancy, like moving to California and having a Ferrari or whatever. But I mean, and so the reason I mention that sounds a bit random is that what I go back to when I get really depressed about the state of the UK is actually, as long as I've got food, shelter, and the love of my loved ones, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, everything else, I think this is really helpful for you sort of psychologically and emotionally. Everything else over and above that is a bonus.
100%.
And if you can think like that, you can kind of endure this a very depressing, tricky, economically challenging time that we're all going through.
Yeah.
It's the only thing you can do, mate.
Or move somewhere that's got some sun.
Yeah, I know, there is that.
Which is that other part of it. But I think it'd be interesting to see, obviously we've just sort of went quite deep into, well, finances, British economy, political narrative, etc. But like, there is a fix in your eyes as well, right?
Well, okay, so yeah, and it is basically technology, right? And obviously, brandish my next book after you should buy it. I mean, I was just reading about the biotech sector, and throughout history, that has kind of been what's come to the rescue. And if you have technology that's so advanced and delivers so much wealth, it can cater to pensions crisis, because it ultimately, I mean, I think, I've used this before, we're in a race between Mad Max and Star Trek, right? Sort of dystopian, apocalyptic future where there's competition for resources and everybody's at war and it's horrible and violent and scary and depressing, and maybe a kind of halcyon utopian future where everybody's actually really wealthy. Although, ironically, I just want to take a step back. So one of the things I always find really intellectually interesting is, so if we got a time machine and went to 1800 right now and walked out the door, it would be unbelievable squalor. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Dying in the streets, open sewers, nobody had any teeth. The world was awful. Human experience was awful, even for royalty. They didn't have flushing toilets or hot water, right?
No, exactly.
Or not every day, and they didn't have coffee.
Even 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, well,
the difference is wild.
Exactly. And although, so what I was going to say, the irony is, like, if you look at the unbelievable increase in living standards, I mean, and the stuff we take for granted, like being able to watch a sports team at the weekend on TV, or, in a massive stadium that costs tens of millions of pounds to build, right? Nobody in the whole of human history did that until like 100 years ago, let's say. Being able to fly on an airplane to a foreign country. We take this, if you walk into a Boots or an Aldi or a Lidl and stop and look around you, like, that's what capital markets and capitalism have given you. And it's absolutely remarkable. And we take 99.9% of it for granted, right? Including, I can get my iPhone and call my mate on the other side of the world on a video call for free.
Yeah.
We take that for granted. We take all this incredible stuff for granted. And the point I was going to make is, if you actually quantify like the uplift in our economic standard of living, we're unbelievably wealthy compared to every other like 99.9% of human beings ever lived, right?
Yeah. Or you just have to compare us to like an African nation, which is just completely far behind.
2+ billion people have gone from being grindingly poor on less than $1 a day and starving.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there are still obviously lots of places in the world that are problematic, but it's nothing like what it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's getting better all the time in a big way. And because our press never talks about good news, nobody really takes that on board.
No.
But the broader point I was going to make, which is, because to come back to you, what's the fix? Because there's a caveat to the fix. So what I worry about is, so let's say that our material circumstances today they're literally dozens of times better than your average person in 1800, right? Or 1900. But depression and rates of mental illness and unhappiness and dissatisfaction are the highest they've ever been. So we need to actually really think deeply about why that is and what to do about it. Because kind of in many ways, we've only got ourselves to blame, because it's the way we look at the world. It goes back to my Buddhist monk point. And we need to do a far better job at educating people about all the things that, like, people aren't students of what actually makes them happy. A lot of the things people think make them happy don't make them happy, because nobody actually studies the stuff. We should be teaching people this stuff. And I think financial markets are a big part of that, because if you know about financial markets, you're more likely to be wealthy, which, despite the nonsensical money doesn't hate, they're increasingly showing that money doesn't make you happy is bullshit, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Basically,
they
covering,
said it was that £67,000, wasn't it? $67,000.
Being fucking poor makes you very unhappy, right? And so, and the solution to that is knowing a little bit about finance, a lot less than most people. I mean, you've heard me say it before. Learning how to drive your finances effectively and change your life is no harder than learning how to drive a car. Everybody learns how to drive a car. No, if you go, I know a little bit about the stock market, like, fucking hell, you must be a genius.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
It's crazy, right? It's a huge societal blind spot. But the point I wanted to make about the fix is, I genuinely think we're on a trajectory to, standards of living in my lifetime in the developed world, and there'll be a lot more countries that are in the developed world, unless there's nuclear Armageddon or whatever. But if we just carry on the trajectory of the last 2 centuries, most people will be on $200,000 or $250,000 a year of income in real terms, in terms of their access to holidays and health and clothes and iPhones and food and whatever. Truly, like, if you benchmark it to today's $50,000 or $45,000, whatever, and we'll probably be even less happy. And I think that what we need to do is have a kind of thought process around how we achieve the the $250,000 per head per person, and in places like Kenya and Nigeria and, you know, Indonesia and Pakistan and wherever else. But we're also happy. And I think that's a challenge for political systems all over the world.
Yeah, completely. You're right. And I think obviously biotechnology plays a massive role in changing that outcome.
I think that's right. And that's what I wanted to cover in the book, because the whole middle section, Biotech and You, because first it's like it's going to deliver all this incredible wealth. Because, you know, prosaically, if a company cures cancer, it's going to be worth $5 trillion. It's going to, you know, a company that develops ubiquitous robots for elderly care, that means that we have a huge top-heavy demographic problem where we've got loads of really old people and we're going to really struggle to afford to look after them. But if you have really good robots that can help with that, you know, sounds a bit like dodge and weird.
It does, because we're
going to need it. It's the only thing that's going to make it not awful.
It's not far away either.
Well, exactly. When you look at what Tesla and folks are doing at Boston Robotics, whatever they're called. But to the point I was going to make is, I think what it's also going to do, which I think is where you were driving, is it's going to teach us so much about the merits of nutrition and exercise, and, you know, have like cold exposure and breathing and all the stuff that's kind of the example I go back to is always like the debate between vegetarians and vegans and carnivores and paleos, and it's like this, someone's like Catholics and Protestants, right? You know, it's like
the new school.
But it's like people get so, it's like, if you're not vegan, you're really unhealthy and you're an idiot. And then like the carnivore people are like, if you don't eat loads of red meat and avocados and fat, and you're an idiot. And they're both completely wrong, because what they failed to account for is
balance.
But it's also, it's the microbiome, because it's your genome, your biome and your virome. It's within, we're all completely different. And that's a function of your genetics and also where you grow up and the microbiome around you and in you. And like, if you grow up in the Arctic, you have a different biome to if you grow up in Manhattan.
Right, yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah,
but that's, the point is, the biotech industry, only literally in the last probably 5 years, is finally giving us a granular understanding of the detail of that. So we can finally say, no, like you should not be a vegan, because you're Northern European and you're genetically predisposed, and you have these, you have these 2,000 different strains of bacteria in your gut and on you that mean you should eat this.
Really interesting you say this, right? Because I've just done Bionic.
Right.
Have you seen Bionic?
No, is that like Zoe kind of similar?
Similar. So they took my bloods, took gut, stool, and basically developed me custom-made supplements, which are only for me.
Yeah, amazing.
In a lab, and then they've given me a nutrition plan, which is directly related to the issues that I have with my guts and the things that I'm deficient in for me, and then they track it every 3 months.
Well, so so that's a much more sophisticated, you know from the book, right? So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in like 2008, and I had like 6 or 7 horrendous years, which is why one of the reasons I got really personally interested in this, involved in it and understood it. And I was also working in the biotech industry, which helped. And I haven't had a symptom for like 6 years. And mine is a really blunt tool, which is just learning about probiotics and like sleep and cold exposure and breathing and all
of it together,
all that stuff. But I think the last few decades with respect to all this stuff, like what you just articulated, what was it called? Bionic.
Yeah.
So that's moving in the direction I think we're going to go. But you're an early adopter and you're quite wealthy relative, you know, somebody on a minimum wage in Brazil.
Exactly. I have like gut problem health.
You need to get on Simprove, by the way. We should talk about that offline.
Let's do it offline.
Because that's, I think, the best probiotic on the UK
And also
market.
I'm like doing all of this, right? Regulating sleep, exercising,
cold exposure,
health
breathing,
and wealth, doing all of it, right? So then the last thing of that was like the supplementation wasn't right. And so,
but the broader point I wanted to make about that is the sort of gift that biotech can give us is
which is
the last few decades have been characterized by great confusion and debate, and like whether it's diet or whatever it is, you know, the classic front cover of the Daily Mail or the Express, like sausages increase your risk of cancer by 100%, and it's just such bullshit science, because it's like, you know, it'll be some animal study. And the other classic one I always come back to is, so the number of times journalists will say something has increased by 100% when the chance has gone from 1 in 100 million to 1 in 50 million. So people read it and go, oh my God, like I've got 100% more risk of getting cancer from doing whatever the thing is.
1 in 50 million.
Now you've got a 1 in 50 million chance. And by the way, you can't rely on any of these numbers. It's all bullshit anyway for all of this stuff. So it's a bit like when...
I think what you were saying to say is basically like...
the uncertainty's going
10 years ago for me to be able to have done that would have probably cost me 50, 60,000 pounds
100%.
just for one off.
Correct.
And then now that was 150 quid
And in
one band.
in 10 years, it'll be a tenner in Boots or a quid.
Right.
And also...
Which is going to change
everything.
Enormous amount of life.
That's right, because like, mental health is massively related to nutrition. It sounds really trite, but if you're suffering from mental health, eat a banana every day. Like, I know it sounds completely ridiculous. No medical advice being given, is it? But and obviously that's not completely curative, but there are all these component pieces that can move you back in the right direction.
Totally.
And I just want to make sure, because it is the point is we're on the cusp of, basically because of a bunch of really advanced technologies, analytical diagnostic stuff that looks at, at the level of the genome, and not just the genome of your human genome, because you're like 0.5% of you're basically, we are two enormous piles of bacteria and viruses talking to each other right now.
Yeah.
And a very small amount of the genetic makeup in us is actually human genetic makeup. Most of it's bacterial or viral. And that is what dictates mental health, longevity, energy levels, everything. And it's been such a dark art that we just haven't really understood. And still, we're only just emerging now out of that uncertainty. But in 10, 15, 20 years with AI and machine learning and really advanced, inexpensive diagnostics, and to your point,
incredible.
You'll be able to walk into Boots and go,
what's wrong with me?
Can you sort me out?
Yeah.
And you'll be sorted out within like a few days. But also, because the other trend there is apps, Whoop and stuff like that. The Whoop's the wearable watch that does.
I've got it on.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I'm getting one of them.
I'm like a Chris Williamson.
Yeah,
poster
exactly.
boy.
Or Tim Ferriss, the quantified self.
Literally.
But that stuff's going to be, we're in the foothills of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's only like tech
It's
bro
just really
early
interesting.
adopters.
It's really interesting.
But I think it will be in the same way that paracetamol. How much does paracetamol cost? It's like 50p. That's a remark, because that's another thing. Just because one of the things, a lot of people hear the title of it and they're like, biotech's bullshit, drug companies, assholes,
Exactly.
Blah.
It's an innovation.
Okay, firstly, you're talking about a tiny, tiny sliver of a $5.5 trillion value industry, right? Biotech's revolutionizing agriculture and dairy and cheese, and it's not just drugs, right?
Yeah.
But on the drug point, when flying was first like commercially available in, let's say, the 1920s, realistically, literally royalty and presidents could afford to fly.
Exactly.
It was like the equivalent, it was like 200,000 quid to fly from London to New York, equivalent in today's money, whatever it was.
Yeah.
When TVs were first introduced in the 50s, it was a year's salary. Like it was a lawyer's year's salary, not a factory worker's. And the point I'm trying to make is that the reason you can now buy a massive flat screen TV in Argos for like 250 quid is because of which is a wonderful, wonderful thing for all of us. Because if you apply these exponential trajectories to all the stuff we're talking about, that's why TVs are accessible to everyone. And of course, now we all take it for granted and watch too much TV and challenges our mental health. But the point I wanted to make is, so all these people pillorying arsehole bad pharma companies because their drugs are like $1 million a dose for the most cutting. There's a cancer drug that basically has cured childhood leukemia. Fact. Yeah. Hardly anybody knows it. It's called Kymriah, Novartis, Swiss company. It's been around for about 6 years, and the post-approval data is really good. It's like 86% remission rate in kids with cancer, with leukemia.
But it's ridiculously expensive.
It's $475,000 a dose. But the people who developed, one of my clients actually did what's called the lentivector, the viral vector that carries the therapeutic payload into the patient.
Yeah.
So the numbers are actually confidential, as they often are in industry, because otherwise these companies go bust, right? But it was a few $1 million a dose when they were doing the clinical trials. So they were hemorrhaging money, like losing money, billions of dollars. They managed through like loads of R&D and applying lots of work to get it down to like a low hundreds of thousands of dollars a dose, which made it profitable, not recouping the $3 billion they invested, but at least profitable for each dose you sell. If you sell a dose for $475 and the costs in that are less than $475, you make a little bit of profit, right? And then they've said publicly they've brought it down another 5 to 10x since then. So it's since 2014, so it's, what's that, 10 years, they've gone from like X millions of dollars a dose for this thing to tens of thousands of dollars a dose. Stands to reason 10 years from now it will be like $2 or $3 grand a dose, and then children in Nigeria or India or Pakistan will be able to have a treatment for leukemia.
Yeah.
And the only way these companies can achieve that, just as with the TV becoming cheap or airplanes becoming cheap, is technology, and crucially making a frigging profit. Because if you don't make a profit, you don't survive, and you don't have billions of dollars to reinvest in R&D. And that's
the
what
innovation doesn't happen. Exactly.
That's what I made a really controversial statement the other day. I'm going to make it again. I'm going to get pilloried for this. I've yet to meet an anti-capitalist who understands capitalism. By which I mean everything I've just said, how the bond market works in terms of funding government, how the stock market works, how many tens of thousands of companies there are in the world right now working on rolling back environmental degradation, improving our soil productivity, all the stuff that we're worried about, the way we've despoiled the environment, all the environmental stuff. There are thousands and thousands of companies working on that stuff as capitalistic entities. They need support. We don't need to tear up the whole system, because if we do, we'll get to the right outcome far slower. And the challenge I find is that so few people know that any of that's going on.
Yeah. They are like addicted to the news. They're addicted to their phone screens, Daily Mail conversations, and they don't Musk quote, see it, right?
I love that Elon Musk quote, which is, and I'm not like some sort of big fanboy, but I think it's a good quote, which is, the news seeks to answer the question, what is the worst thing that happened in the world today?
Yeah.
And it's actually completely insane. So basically, if you think the news is probably empirically 99% negative.
Well, there's a study done 99.7%.
Right, okay, but and crucially, so you get half an hour bulletin where it's like, I'm in a dark suit, and I'm now going to tell you only the really shit things that happen in the world today.
Yeah.
The problem is that's another reason for this whole disconnect between our levels of affluence and our levels of mental health and feeling good about the world. Because actually people think they're informed by consuming that. They're not. They're fundamentally misinformed, because most of what happened in the world yesterday was kind of neutral to good, like today, or people going to the pub. But the news makes us think that 99% of what's happening is really shit. It's like in most towns, cities, villages, whatever in the world right now, people are doing fairly normal pedestrian, or kissing their kids, before they put them to bed, or whatever.
Doing that bit of charity work, or whatever that might well be, to improve.
Or just normal, just going to work, like having people in this building downstairs, just having a coffee and talking about, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And we have, because we're all focused on Yemen and Gaza and, COVID and Putin, and everybody has a really, really warped sense of the reality. And that's a big personal mission of mine, and part of why I wanted to write that book, because one of the really negative ramifications of that, apart from us all having shit mental health outcomes, is it retards progress, because journalists don't write about, you never see the news going, today there's been a really interesting breakthrough in a lab in Cambridge which might cure cancer.
No, exactly.
You don't see that. It's in the back pages of New Scientist.
Oh, it's like packed, it's like packed into page 22.
Correct, but that makes it really hard for these capitalistic entities that could be changing the world to raise money, which means we're moving far more slowly than we might otherwise move.
Totally agree. And I think, on the positive side, we've got 3 out of the 10 best universities in the planet located here, with actually possibly the best scientific labs ever.
Yeah.
But then when you look at it, it's like...
Well, I mean, sorry, I'm cutting across.
No, not at all. I think but then we have the least opportunity for them to create these small research businesses.
The stat that drives me absolutely nuts on that front, right? So Cambridge University has won more Nobel Prizes for physiology or medicine than pretty much every other country in the world. Just Cambridge University. I think it's 37. It's 37 for medicine and chemistry off the top of my head. But anyway, America's won more. Germany's probably won more, but that's remarkable. And Oxford's
for like
20 or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But on a per capita basis, it's like the punching heavier than anyone else in the world, pretty much. But Britain lags America in terms of company formation and value creation by trillions of dollars. Not billions, trillions. How the fuck have we let that happen?
I know.
And so an example of that is one of the most valuable drugs of all time. It's called Humira. It was developed by a company called Cambridge Antibody Technologies in the late 90s, early noughties.
Right.
It was then bought by another company, which was then bought by AbbVie, and it's done $240 billion of revenues since then.
Yeah.
All of which went to American shareholders.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the tax went to it. And it's like, this just goes back to my whole point. We're making it worse through having ridiculous policy. And it's, and
I read a stat. It was Cambridge University, 9% of alumni start a business, 10% from Oxford.
Yeah.
Versus that to Harvard, it's 30-something%.
That's interesting. Well, the other tragic stat is that of that 9% and 10%, 95% of them move to
early
San
stage.
Francisco.
Yeah, they all go. Yeah, exactly.
They do, and it's
yeah.
And I don't, it's because the other point I made about all of this chat we're having that drives me nuts is everything we're talking about. Like the reason Britain is in such a mess and people's lives are, why does that matter? Because people's lives are harder and shitter, right? And and we're going to lose high streets up and down the land are going to be tumbleweed, ghost town horribleness, right? And it's
already there. It's going to get worse, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. But what really, really drives me nuts about this is none of this was an electoral issue. Seriously, think about it. We had a general election this year. 99% of what we've just talked about didn't make it onto any news bulletin or any question time. It's like Angela Rayner might have lied on her tax affairs with a second home, or the Tories want to send people to Rwanda. But it's like, meanwhile, there's this great big fucking elephant in the room right next to you going, yeah, we've lost half of our stock market listed companies.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the solution is. Like people, idiots like you and me, shouting bollocks and trying to get a few 100,000 poor people to care about this stuff. I guess that's what I do. I must have done 10 podcast interviews in the last 4 months, and I know I'm pretty Marmite. Lots of people think I'm full of shit, and I get trolled a lot. But I believe in what I'm saying, and I think more people need to. I genuinely just think very few people are students of capital markets or any of the things I've talked about. Very, very few people, and I think we need to do a better job spreading that message.
So someone who's sitting here today then thinking, bloody hell, like we've just gone pretty, deep into this economy.
Yeah.
What can they do? What can like the everyday person actually do today that could really make a difference to them?
Well, I mean, like I always go back to this, the number one vector, the trouble is it requires patience, which I think we talked about last time, but like, becoming truly financially literate. And as I say, it's not that hard. It's not like everyone thinks it's a fucking PhD. It's just like
few hours.
Yeah, exactly. Engage with some resources. And, my book is a book, which is UK focused. It's not the only book.
It's a brilliant book.
Well, thank you very much. And but there's a great book called The Psychology of Money, which I know Morgan Housel, which is that's a really good one as well. Although it's, mine's British focused, it's American focused. But I just think equip yourself to drive your finances and it's not, that's not going to make you rich in a month or 6 months or a year, but it's like the old cheesy thing about the trajectory of an aeroplane, right? If you change the trajectory, aeroplane takes off from Heathrow. If you change its trajectory by 2 degrees, it'll end up in Buenos Aires instead of Sydney or whatever the cheesy example is that's along those lines. And it's like, it's exactly the same with becoming financially literate.
Yeah.
You make these, because I always get pilloried. It's like, if you can afford to invest 25 quid a month in the stock market, do it. Because what happens is you build this habit, and then within a few, you'll see stuff happening, and then you've built a habit, and then you make it 50 quid, then you make 100 quid. And if you set that one life change, 30 years later will make the difference between whether you have like a fat 6-figure or even 7-figure sum to your name, and you're all right, or you never did, and you never sorted out. And one of the things I really do struggle with is I get a lot of inbound emails and messages on social and stuff. And the tragic thing is always when somebody emails me and says like, I'm, 72 and I've just read your book and
I wish I'd have heard
correct. And it's just like, and I've got no pension and, I'm really freaking out. And what do I do? And can you help? And it's like,
no,
not really.
No.
Other than, it's never too late to do something and to improve.
Of course. There's some things, but
you're going to have, like, if you're 72 and you're still fit and healthy and you can do a job and maybe ideally something white collar, because at 72, you're not going to be a miner and preferably not a farmer or anything that requires a lot of physical, activity. But you're going to have to try and earn money and you're going to have to do the best you can with that money from now on. But this is what I think, I'm in the process, I'm delivering it by the 31st of December, but come hook or by crook or whatever the expression is. But basically we're doing a young adults version of that book.
Brilliant.
Because as I've been bleating on about at the beginning of the book, it's like, if you sort this out in your early 20s, you've got such a high chance of being in a really good place. And people are like, well, why am I going to sacrifice 10% of my salary in my 20s just because I'll be rich when I'm 65? It's like, no, don't think about it like that. Think about it like this. If you don't do it, you're going to be fucking poor. Life's going to be really bad. And that's why it's carrot and stick, right? The good news is you've got a chance of being quite wealthy. Bad news is if you don't do it, you are going to be really poor because the government is not going to be able to pay for you.
No, exactly. Whether or not we even get a state pension by the time we get there.
Well, it's already,
it's already on the table.
Yeah, exactly. But even now, if you have what's the state pension now? 10 grand a year?
Yeah, well, £221.50 a week,
Yeah, so that's
give or take.
Ish, right?
Yeah.
So how does that wash if how's that going to cover how much of your whatever expenses you have right now?
Well, it doesn't. Even the average pension pot retirement, including state pension, ends up about £1,200 a month.
So, yeah, because I always go, it's like, really depressingly, the average British person has about £50,000 at retirement, and it's like 70,000 quid for men and much less for women.
Exactly.
Still
There's
today.
a gender investment, pension gap. It's enormous. But yeah, like that's not a lifestyle you want to live. So, but you can go like to even get to like a even base level of like £100 a month.
Yeah.
Over a long period of time.
Makes a huge difference.
3-4 times the average pension pot. So
exactly,
like, just
it's like, why wouldn't you do it? Because I mean, yeah, this is possibly for another. I sense we've been talking for ages, and
that's right.
But and this is a deep dive. But because the thing I always go back to is, let's talk about just quickly the difference between investing and trading. Because one thing I find all the time is like, particularly young people, particularly with exposure in crypto, is like people conflate those two things. They think investing and trading are the same thing. They're completely different things.
No, requires basically a PhD.
Yeah, and trading's really tough. It's you're much more likely to lose money. It's far more time consuming. If you don't have tons of capital, the likelihood that you make any kind of tangible return in absolute terms, like if you've got 100 grand, you can make 2% a month. That's 2 grand. It's really hard to make 2% a month. If you've got
Very
a grand,
difficult.
It's not fucking worth it. Like you should spend your time getting better at your job, or whatever else you might be doing. But the main thing is like investing is something you learn to do and do forever with whatever you earn every month forever, and it will give you an amazing outcome. But it's really important because what a lot of this whole trading versus investing thing, the reason I mention it is because a lot of people stumble over this stuff and then they're like, well, I've been investing for like 3 months and nothing's happened. And it's like, you've totally not understood the whole. Yeah.
I just say think in decades.
Yeah, 100%.
As well as you just think in decades rather than years, not months, definitely not days.
And if the market goes down, carry on fucking buying, because that's what's going to make you wealthy. Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
But because it's, again, I can't remember if we said this before, but one of the real problems with that is that psychologists tell us is that when you or I conceptualize of ourselves aged like 70, if I mentally think about that person is as much a stranger to me that I'm not at all interested in as a 7-year-old bloke in the pub over the road right now.
Totally.
So I'm gonna sacrifice. I'm gonna have a not as nice car, one fewer holiday a year, or fewer trips to the pub, or whatever. All the things I'm gonna sacrifice in order to square away 10% of my income every month without fail for 30 years to give some random stranger a much better life. Why do I want to do that? And it's like, you have to be aware of that reality so that you can bust through it, because if you don't do it, you're going to be really poor, to the point we made earlier.
Yeah, totally. All right, to round that off then, I think that we've, like, the reason why people should take that into consideration is because biotechnology is going to make you live longer.
Well, that's exactly, that's another...
so you're going to live longer.
Yeah, well, they're already saying, but, life expectancy...
It's going up.
Yeah, it was 47 in 1909 when we invented the pension. 47. I mean, it's insane, right? And now it's like 84 or whatever it is.
Right,
Depends on men and women.
Exactly. So the actual chances of you making it there and not being able to work and look after yourself and fund yourself.
And it is, and that's right. And it is really important to stress, because again, people think this is a party political thing. It's like, well, if Labour in power, it'll all be fine. Everybody will have a really generous pension.
Forget about that.
Correct.
Like,
it's a mathematical inevitability based on demographics. And it's like, so everybody has to take responsibility for that, because that is bad news. By the way, like to my point about Star Trek and everything, like, set against that, if AI and robotics and biotech and efficient because it's basically this idea of refashioning the periodic table, right? If we become really, really genius at creating energy and refashioning the periodic table to make all the stuff like the chairs we're sitting on, and shelter and warmth and electricity, and we have like limitless. Imagine a scenario we have
ultimate power.
Yeah, well, we have hyper. It's very science fiction, but it's also really exciting because it could actually happen in our lifetimes. But if you imagine that every sort of desert in the world that's just dead. There are no animals there apart from a few little, comedy little rodents running around you see on David Attenborough programs. But broadly, like, the middle of the Sahara, there's like, I don't know, it's millions of square kilometers. It's probably millions, but it's hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of just useless, dead, sandy, stony bullshit land that you're never going to be able to grow any crops on. And if we can carpet that with fairly non-invasive, biologically coated photovoltaic cells that generate electricity, and then plumb that to a terminal in, Tunisia or Morocco or whatever, and then it goes under the sea into Europe. Honestly, there is a scenario whereby we have like massively abundant electricity. We have all the power we need for industry. We have all the power to build robots and spaceships. And as nuts as it sounds, that's because
it's reality.
If we do that, then the government might be able to afford for us all to. And if a lot of elderly care is done by robots, or if there's another big theme in the book, if health span, if 85 is the new 45, and actually at 85 because you've done the bionic stuff and you've
longevity.
You're still really spry, and then I don't know whether because it's like the optimal in terms of death, slightly morbid, is that you basically live a really, really healthy, fit life, and you can do everything you want to do until like you just die. And it's kind of like, how do we engender that? That's it's unlikely to happen. But anyway, God, I've sensed that I feel a bit self-conscious. I've been swearing my arse off and just sort of bollocking on about 25 different topics. But,
it's been really good fun. I just love chatting to you about this type of stuff because, I think like the thing is for me, I'll stumble across one study, then I'll see you post something different, which is connected to it. And then I'm down some rabbit hole with this person.
I've ruined your day.
No, I'm like, that's me gone. Well, technically, probably because I was supposed to be doing something else. And now I'm reading about GDP per capita and resources of Norway. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, thanks, Andrew. But the reason why is just like, I just love talking about this stuff properly with people that actually like really care about the outcome of people, which is like what it all comes back to.
That's exactly right. And it's also like the joys of having a podcast, right? Is that if you called up a mate and said, can we go to the pub and spend an hour and a half talking about like politics and economics and capital market? They go, fuck off. But like happily, the joy of a podcast is you can. And I'm really up for that as well. So I do shitloads of podcasts. Basically total losers, both of us. We'll see about that. The books are out now on Amazon. And how can people? Is that where you want to send people, or is there a better place to go? You can get them from Waterstones and stuff. I think even that one was in Waterstones for a while. I don't know whether that one's made it in or not, because there's only like 2,000 books in a Waterstones, right? So it's like the top 2,000 books, so it's pretty tricky. But no, Amazon, it's all over. Both of them are on Amazon.
Well, I've read them both. They're great, man. They're great reads.
Thank you very much. Well, if I may, the one thing I do want to just say is anybody who's got a Spotify subscription, they're both on Spotify.
Oh, cool.
So you can exactly. So if you're already paying for Spotify, you effectively get them for free or no additional costs. Nice. I shouldn't say that because I think I make a lot less money if they do that. Buy the bloody hard copy. Exactly. Give me money. I'm going to invest it in the world to improve things. But it's kind of cool that it's on Spotify because it just makes it less of a, if people want to check it out.
It's such a new hack from them. I think it's brilliant. I've been really going through it.
I was really annoyed with my publisher because like that one was on Spotify for like a year before they told me. They didn't tell me. A mate of mine said, your book's on Spotify. I was like, no, it's not. They were like, so it's like a whole year where I could have been like tweeting about it or whatever and saying, check out my book.
Well, we'll leave links, of course, to the books in the show notes below. Cool. I definitely recommend starting with How to Own the World, though, because I think it's like a very good like introductory way into like actually making a difference to your life, and then definitely then go on to Our Futures Biotech.
Well, and also, so my second one's called Live on Less, Invest the Rest, which is kind of like a workbook. So that's like the theory. Live on less is in fact the practice, and we're just about to publish the new version of that. Hopefully, literally like in December, failing that in early in January. So. And actually, if anybody's ever bought a copy of the last edition of that, we're going to give people free electronic, like PDF and EPUB versions of that for anybody who like emails us and goes, I bought your first copy and now you've added 60 new pages. Can I please have the new one? And we'll say, yes, here it is.
Oh, cool.
But we can't afford to send everybody a print.
Do they go to plain English finance?
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, if anybody following us on our YouTube channel, which is just Andrew Craig, Plain English Finance, or, ping me on LinkedIn, or I don't do Instagram or TikTok, because I can't do them all.
Smart.
I don't do short form. You know me, mate. I talk very long form bollocks. But
the YouTube channel is great as well. Like we'll link to it all.
Yeah, exactly. And then
definitely
people
get
will
on.
see when this stuff happens, and they can get a free copy of my workbook.
Cool. Well, mate, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, mate.
We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, well, let's do it again in 3 months' time.
I think we have to do a residency when it all kicks off again.
I'll probably say all the same shit again, but fingers crossed. Thanks a lot, mate.
Cheers. Wow, I absolutely love that conversation with Andrew Craig, and he's always a pleasure to have him on the sofa because it's just so nice having a conversation with someone who cares about this as much as we do on this podcast. Honestly, his book absolutely blew me away. If you've not read it, definitely get it. How to Own the World, and then his next one, Our Future is Biotech. Both absolute bangers. And we will 110% have Andrew back on the show very soon because I just love talking to him about this stuff. But if you are not subscribed on YouTube, please whack that subscribe button. And if you are on Spotify or Apple, give us a follow, give us a little 5-star review. It really does help the show grow. But for now, we'll see you guys next week. And it's been a real pleasure. Peace.